Assalamu alaikum everyone. I hope this video finds everyone well. So this is Izadullah Zahir and I am your English writing teacher. I'll be teaching you the paragraphs. Okay, so let's move on. Before I jump into our new lecture, I want to take a look at our previous lecture. In previous lecture we studied paragraph and one of the types of paragraph. So let's take a quick look on the previous lecture. So let's start with the paragraph. Remember guys, I insisted a lot in the last lecture on the pronunciation. So the pronunciation of this word is this writing term is paragraph. It's not paragraph. A lot of people pronounce it paragraph, while the proper pronunciation is paragraph, right? If you cannot pronounce it paragraph, so it's okay. At least you can try your best. At least you can try your level best to make the exact pronunciation. Okay, so try to divide them into syllables so it will be easier for you to master it. So paragraph, and repeat with yourself over and over. I understand that picking up the exact pronunciation at the very first level is not easy, so you should try it, repeat it over and over. Inshallah you will master the pronunciation. So let's move on. So in previous lecture we started writing paragraph. What's paragraph and how do we define paragraphs? So let's go through the previous lecture. Paragraph is, we studied that paragraph is taken from Greek word paragraphos, means to write beside or written beside. It's self-contained unit of discourse and writing dealing with a particular idea. I'm not going to further explain this because we have already studied this in the previous lecture. Okay, and then we studied the definition of paragraph. So we say paragraph is a group of sentences that develops one main or single idea. We talked about all of them in details in previous lecture, so let me just go briefly over them. So then we studied the kinds of paragraphs. We didn't study individually the kinds of paragraphs, we just studied one of them, but let's go through the kinds of paragraphs that we have. Four most common kinds of paragraph. The first one is narrative paragraph, second one is descriptive paragraph, third one expository paragraph, and the fourth one is persuasive paragraph. We have studied only one of them, which was persuasive paragraph. Now try to repeat your lesson before you start the new one. So before we jump into the new lecture, I request you to study persuasive paragraph in detail so that you can easily understand the narrative paragraph. So let's move on. The first one, the second paragraph which we are going to study today is narrative paragraph. What is narrative paragraph? How do you define narrative paragraph? We'll come to this later, but before we start describing or defining the narrative paragraph, I would like to take you through some of the most common words that are concerned with the narrative paragraph. So the most common words that are concerned with the narrative paragraphs are narrate. So narrate is a verb, which means to copy or to bring the story of something, right? And the second, it functions as a verb, do not forget it. The second one is narrator. Narrator is a person who narrates something, who recalls a story, who tells a story to somebody, okay? And the other one is narration, which is the noun form. The process in which you narrate something is called narration. And the adjective form is what? Narrative. So we say these are the forms of narrative. So once again, narrate is a verb, which means to say a story, to recall a story, to deliver a story, or to bring a story. Narrator is a person who narrates something. Narration is the way or the process in which you narrate something, and narrative means that the form or the adjective form of narration, narration. Okay, so let's move on. So the original is narrate. Okay, so I got you accustomed to these terms, so I hope you don't understand. I hope you don't miss it when I use them in the explanation. Okay, so let's see, how do you define narrative paragraph? There are a lot of definitions for narrative paragraph. Different people, whenever I say different people, so I mean to say the writing experts. So they define it in different ways. Narrative paragraph has been defined in so many ways. So one of the most common one is narrative writing is writing in which we tell story in narrative events according to chronological order. What I didn't say here is the narrative paragraph. We say that a paragraph in which we narrate a story or events according to the chronological order. So what is narrative writing? Which is generated from the narrative paragraphs. When we start writing narrative paragraph, so we say that we are developing or we are writing a narrative writing. So that's why we say it's a paragraph in which we tell stories, narrate events according to chronological order. Chronological order means time-wise, which is very important. Remember that whatever you narrate, whatever you bring it to the present, you should pay attention to the time. So now what's chronological order? We will study chronological order in details in the coming lessons. So let's move on. So I define once again, a narrative paragraph is a paragraph in which we narrate or tell story events according to the chronological order. So that's the definition of narrative paragraph. Let's move on. Whenever you're writing a story, you're answering the questions what happened. Keep in mind, whenever you come across the writing a narrative paragraph, we should think about the answer, and that answer is what happened. Whenever you answer the what happened question in a paragraph form, it means you are developing a narrative paragraph. Very simple. Sometimes it's hard for us to start writing, so and break it down, so it's easy for you to think of a question and then you start answering that question according to chronological order. So it means you're writing a narrative paragraph. It will be very easy for you to pick up your pen and start answering the what happened question. Okay, let's move on. So now, how do we plan our narrative paragraph? So planning your narrative paragraph, which is most often I am asked from the students that, sir, how do we plan our narrative paragraph? So whenever you want to plan your narrative paragraph, you should think of the following three major elements that we should take it into account while you're writing a narrative paragraph. So these comes in the planning session. So first we say plot. The first one is a plot, and the second one is character, third one is setting. Now, what's plot, what's character, what's setting? We will study them one by one. Okay, let's get started. Plot. Plot, the set of connected events on which a story, play, film, and so on is based. In short, what happens in narrative is called plot. It's explained so briefly and wonderfully. You see, in short, what happens in narrative is called plot. I mean, the story, the play, the film, all it's called plot. Okay, so we say that whatever happens in narrative, in simple words, is called plot. So, and the second we have is character. Remember the pronunciation, not character, it's a character. So what's character, right? How do you define character? What are characters? So the people or the animals that take part in the event or narrative are called the characters. Any living or non-living beings that take part in the story or in an event is called character. Remember that. So if there is a human being which is playing a role, we call the character. If there is a tree is also a living being. If there is a tree and tree is also part of the event, it's also called character. There is a dog, there is a horse. So there are a lot of these living and non-living beings in the event or in story, which we call them character. Okay, and the third one is the setting. The setting puts the character in a particular place in particular time. It means that the events and character are well organized through the setting. Setting, in simple word, we say organization. In setting, we put the plot the character in a right order. I mean, there's a role, and that role is given to the proper character, and it's played so organizedly. We call that setting. So, in simple words, we organize the character and plot by setting. And third element of writing narrative paragraph is setting. In setting, we organize the plot to the characters. That's how we do it. So these were the three major elements of the character. So in briefly, to sum up, I would say plot means the story, the play, whatever happens in narrative, in event, or in story is called plot. Character are the living beings, animals, and people who take part in event. We call them character. Setting is the simple words organization or arranging the plot with the character in a proper order is called setting. Let's move on to the next one. After this, we have some important tips for narrative writing paragraph. So remember that there are some tips that you should take into account before you start writing a narrative paragraph. So what are those tips? The first tip is have an idea in mind. Keep in mind or bear in mind, before you start writing narrative paragraph, you should have an idea into your mind. So that idea will help you to generate or develop a narrative writing quite easily and without any trouble. Okay, have an idea all the time. You should have an idea in your mind. For example, you're talking about your childhood, what happened in your childhood, and you're talking about your like an event that happened in your life, your good memory, for example, that took place in the past, and you want to narrate that one in the present. So it's just an idea. So you have something in your mind, and then you start developing. The second tip is should be in chronological order. Remember that whenever you're writing a narrative paragraph, you should have the order in your mind. I mean, you should remember the time, the plot, the character, and the setting. So you talk about your childhood, so you should remember the order of the events that happened in your childhood. So you should narrate them based on chronological order. So whenever I say chronological order, so I would say means time wise. For example, you talk about your education background, so you start from 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, 15, and then you come forward. So this is, you shouldn't mix them. Whenever you mix them, I mean, like how does it look when you do not pay attention to the chronological order? So whenever you do not pay attention to the chronological order, it will be like you talk about your qualification background. So you say you mention first 2010, and then 2017, and then 2015, and then 2016. You just sort of mix them. Whenever you are mixing them, it means you are not narrating your story according to chronological order. So if you want to narrate your story according to chronological order, so you should have a time-wise order in your mind. Okay. The third one is should have a logical connection. You explain something, it should have a logical connection. It means that you say something, you are talking about a plot, and it matches with the character. You say something that people can accept it easily, and it has a logical connection. For example, you talk about your childhood and good memory, and then you haven't finished that, so you jump to the bad memory. This means you are not connecting them logically. You are saying something that's not true based on logical connection. So whatever you say, the mind should accept. It should be rational, it should be logical, so that people understand. I mean, the sentences should be related with one another, as we study the unity and coherence of paragraph. Listen and learning. Remember that whenever you are narrating a story to someone, it should have a lesson alongside with itself. So it should teach something to the reader, right? As I always say that the best writing is a writing in which the reader and the writer understands one thing. I mean, they take away the same lesson, right? They match their point. When their point mismatch, it means it's not a sound writing. So you talk about your good memory, and then it should have a lesson alongside itself, and it should teach something to the reader. Okay. The third one is climax, best of the point. It should have the ending. We say the most important point, the climax. What happened at the end? movies are the great examples of the narrative paragraph or narrative writing. See, the actor or the star of the movie is a younger boy, then then he or she grows older and then becomes sort of, and then blah blah blah, and comes to the end. There is, like, if there's a romantic movie, so the lovers, I mean the actor or actress get to each other at the end. So it's sort of a story, you make it should have a climax at the end. Okay, the first one is a restatement, as we also call that conclusion. It should have, like, remember I taught you concluding sentence in which you restate whatever happened before. It should have a restatement. Mostly we do not follow the restatement in paragraphs while it's followed in the writing, in narrative writing. Not a lot in writing. We don't see this restatement a lot in narrative paragraph because it's a shorter composition, but we see restatement in essays or in larger compositions. Okay, let's move on. Next we have is creating idea for narrative writing. A story, I mean. It should be a story. Whenever I say writing a narrative paragraph, you should directly think of a story writing. Okay, so when you want to write a narrative paragraph, you have to ask yourself the following questions. I'll make it very easy for you. So how to generate the idea, how you come up with an idea in narrative writing. Very easy. Ask these questions from yourself. The first question is, what's the problem? What's the problem means what happened? Like, what's the problem? What happened? You talk about the problem. It's also you're writing, generating an idea, creating an idea in your mind. What's involved? I mean, who is involved? Sorry, which is character. Who's involved? Who are the people that are involved here? And the third one is what happened. As I said, what's the problem? What happened? And what happened? We would simply say that a setting. You say how it happened, what happened, right? No, sorry, when it happened. Sorry, when it happened. Like, I mean, the chronological order. When it happened, chronological order should be there, right? And fourth is why it happened. You should have reasons for. You should have reasons for this, so that you can convince the reader. Okay. And the fifth one is what was the result. Like, these 5 questions you should ask yourself before you generate an idea. So this is easy for you. I mean, if you answer these questions, it means you are creating an idea for narrative writing. Okay, what's the problem? Who is involved in? When it happened? Why it happened? What was the result? Whenever you answer these 5 questions, it means you are writing a narrative paragraph quite easily. First thing, let me just repeat them. What's the problem? I mean, the plot. Who is involved? The character. When it happened? Chronological order. Why it happened? So we also say that setting. And what was the result? So we say the climax. Okay. Answer these questions in a paragraph form. So you are answering. You're creating an idea for narrative writing. Let's move on. Starting your story. To start your story, you have to focus on what of these 3 elements: plot, character, and setting. Choose the element that's most important. So, when you start writing, you have to think of ahead of time. You should think of, or beforehand, you should think of plot, character, and setting in your mind. Okay. So the first thing, keep your story on track. It means give important information about your narrative. So keep your story on track. It means that you should keep the plot on track. Like, you should give the most important information about your narrative. Okay. So arrange your story in a chronological order. So remember that I focused a lot on the chronological order. It means it should be time-wise, like when it happened. Right? You should answer the when it happened question. And the last one is conclude your story with the concluding words and expressions. I taught you expressions, transitions of concluding in story form, how you conclude a story. So you should, like, for example, you say eventually, finally, to sum up, at the end, in a climax. So you can conclude your narrative paragraph by special words, special transitions, right? So conclude them. So it should have 3 parts, like topic sentence, supporting sentences, and concluding or closing sentence. So a model of narrative paragraph, you can see this. This is a model of narrative paragraph. The first red color is topic sentence, and the others are supporting sentences, followed by concluding sentence. I will stop talking for a few seconds so you can read it, or you can stop the video for yourself. Okay, let's move on. You can stop the video and read it with yourself. Let me give you another. Okay, and this is the end. I hope you understood. If you have any kind of questions, leave in the comment box. I will appreciate your questions, and I will try my best to reach out to your questions and answer them in a most understandable way. Thank you so much for taking out your time. Goodbye, Allah Hafiz, and stay safe.